so I've been a coach my entire life, right? And this was just in the athletic field. So yes, our game was to terminate the point. Right. But when that's not your goal, right, it's to continue the conversation, to keep it going, to stay curious, the yes and.
Welcome to the Hope and Hairspray podcast. I'm Rhodey Kate.
And I'm Kelly Osborne. Today, we will lead you on a journey of self-development and professional growth. You will be inspired to be the best version of who you were meant to be.
Let's jump in.
Hello, hello. Thank you so much for joining us. If you haven't had a chance yet, make sure, of course, you subscribe and follow us and definitely comment. We love comments. But the most important thing that you can do is turn on your notifications, because then you'll know whenever we put something out there. So today, Rhodey, what are we chatting about?
We're talking about the power of and. And okay. I love this. I would say that I actually learned this from my boss at Starbucks. Okay. And she was really big into the power of and. And I think I was kind of a little bit long in my career. I'd been around a lot and just hadn't been around people who said that. And the idea of it's not this or that. I mean, so there's that great book, eat this, not that, do this, not that. It's no, the power of and. We can do both. And I love it because, I love collaboration. So if you're trying to be more collaborative, the power of and is a great tool to use. So that's what we're going to talk about today.
Wow, the power of and. You were definitely the first person I had ever heard that from. And both of us have high positivity, so it made sense. But there's definitely some mind shifting that's going to take place today.
Yeah.
Because I realized where my gaps were, and we hope that we expose some gaps so that you can definitely become a better version of who you were created to be.
Absolutely.
So the power of and, how has it shown itself in your life? Tell us some of the stories.
Yeah. So I think it's so the idea of, if you're in a group and you're like, hey, should we do this? Should we do that? And people, there's just kind of back and forth and you feel like it's a debate. Step back and go, can we do both? Does both make sense? Right? And then all of a sudden we come from not only collaboration, inclusion, right? This inclusiveness. Oh, we're going to do both. So now we're going to take your idea and your idea. And you can imagine the response that a team gets. So just it's a little bit of a sentence, a little bit of a mindset that says, okay, how can we use the power of and here? I think it's also helpful when you are giving feedback to someone and they're talking about, I don't know, should I do this? Should I do that? And again, you can say, well, can you do both?
I love that. So I don't know if there's a psychological basis to that where we tend to think we have to pick a winner, right? Maybe that is part of that subconsciously thinking, oh, I must pick one, right? But when you were talking and sharing your story, the word that came to mind is hybrid.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Right. So we have cars that are gas and electric. Right. They're both.
We go into the office and we work from home. Oh, we do both, right?
We do both. Mm-hmm. So it seems like maybe we can be making a shift towards the power of and. Yeah. We can do that and we can do this. Right. So this one was a tough one for me. Because I know we brought it a little bit in the last episode. I tend to be an all or nothing girl, right? Yeah. All or nothing. Yeah. Like that is the one goal I'm heading towards. And if I can't achieve it, then we might as well just, abort ship, right? It's not worth it.
Right.
So my husband, he brought this to my attention because we will often talk about blind spots, safe space to talk about that, right? And he said, babe, you don't know how to feather the throttle. I still can't even say that very well. I'm like, oh my gosh.
And I don't even know what that means.
So he rides a Harley, right? So when you feather the throttle, you kind of go back down to the medium range, not full tilt,
right,
and not off, right? Just kind of feather that throttle. And I was like, wow, yeah. I have no idea how to do that.
Right.
I have absolutely no idea how to do that. So it's something I've definitely had to learn, that it doesn't have to be all or nothing.
Right.
I can dial back, use the dial, right? I'm off or high, right? And the power of and helps me think that, we can be a little more collective here, a little more collaborative and achieve that. So Rhodey, you also mentioned a book about this, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on. Yeah. But help me understand it just a little bit deeper.
Yeah. So the power of and to me is about, I said kind of inclusion and things like that, but it's about expansive versus narrow, right? So it's this idea of we can include more. I'm an includer. So it's Clifton's strengths, right? I'm an includer. So that means I want to make people feel comfortable and included. And it's kind of the same thing, like this idea of, and we can do this, right? Let's go to dinner and a movie. I mean, like we can do both. We have the capability. We can do both, right? Definitely. And sometimes I think we get that tunnel vision, which is what you were saying. What is that about us that do that? It's that tunnel vision, and for me, I think it's a lot about that tunnel vision. And also, I'm really literal. You know this.
You are very literal.
I'm so literal. It's so bad. And if I am like head down and, grinding something out, I'm like, focused, and I'll take things super literally. So I won't even, it just happened like 2 days ago. And you said, what about, I'm like, oh, that's so obvious. I missed it because I was just so focused. So the power of and kind of, I think, like I physically feel like I step back and sort of straighten my shoulders and open my arms and go, hey, right? We can do both. Why are we having a tug of war over something where we can actually do both? So the power of and to me is super important in that. I think it's super important when it comes to being more collaborative.
I love that. This reminds me of a very just adorable, simple story. So our oldest grandson is almost 4 years old, and we saw includer in him very, very early. We took him to the toy store. It's one of our things to do with our grandkids downtown. They have a great no electronic toy store.
It's so beautiful, actually. I love it.
Incredible. Serendipity Road with Joyful Tantrum. I love it. But they had a little marble display, and we would, as an adult, you'd pick a marble and put it down. Not our grandson. He had to give every marble a turn. And I just love that grandparents can actually sit in the moment. We're almost never in a hurry. So that was beautiful. But we got to see him do one marble at a time, and each marble had to have its turn. So he was and just including everybody. A very simple story, but it was very profound to watch him. And now we can just love and admire and encourage that includer in him, because he does have that expansive mindset. It doesn't have to be limited to one choice.
That's right.
Well, until it's treat time.
Well, then, yeah. Well, I mean, and these aren't, speaking of being literal, I mean, all of our podcasts aren't literal. There's not one way. It's just, it's usually, sometimes we're on the different side of things. So it's, hey, how can you see this? And what's another way of seeing this? And can you do something different that's going to allow you to learn, grow, get the results that you want? Sometimes we're not getting the results we want. So can we make a shift? We talked last time, I think, about small changes. Make a small shift or so to get what you want. But the power of and, I think, for those people that are, so I don't want to offend anyone, but like I'm thinking like that. My vision right now in my head, I see pictures in my head, is that, only child. And I was kind of an only child. My siblings are 5 and 8 years older. Like mine. And, you're held versus, it's just that expansiveness of the power of and. We can share, we can do these things. So from that perspective, I think it's super helpful.
For sure. I think we have a beautiful example of that. The power of and are you and I.
Yeah.
We just came off an amazing staff retreat that we facilitated over the course of a couple of days up north. That's what we say here in Michigan, is we go up north. And if it wasn't for our partnership where we could have each other, right? We had different opportunities to chime in. And when you are closed-minded, you think it all depends on you. You have to deliver. There was not one stretch of more than 15 minutes where we didn't get each other's feedback during a workshop, right? And it was so incredible. And then also that makes me think of the power of and is also there's different learning types in that room. since you have a corporate background, I'm small business, they can hear from different sides. And maybe the way you articulated the words was going to open up half the room, and maybe the way I articulated them. So using both of our backgrounds, I think is so important, and it's so effective. And obviously we love doing these staff retreats.
Well, not to go down a rabbit hole or something like that. But when I first really got into facilitating groups, and I worked for a not-for-profit, and 19 states, and we would go, I was a big proponent of 2 facilitators, like the power of and because of that, because sometimes when you're facilitating, you can't see something else going on. And so that person can add some feedback for the room and vice versa. And you have like different ways of communicating. So I'm a big proponent of that. And I notice we don't do that as much in corporate America, probably from a financial perspective. But I think oftentimes when I had the opportunity, and I led a lot of training, so I was able to do that, I would even partner up as the HR person with a business partner. And so that power of and is you've got this view and you have that view, right? You have the leadership view and you have sort of like, maybe someone boots on the ground. So the power of and can work a lot of ways. But I think for me, I love it from a collaborative. I think it's a great collaborative tool.
It is wonderful. And let's just face it. There's sometimes when you're up there facilitating and somebody asks you a question and you're like, how am I going to answer this? And so when you have somebody else, it's beautiful because they're like, I've got that. Right. I can tag. I'm in. And I love that about us because we naturally we have to be careful. We finish each other's sentences so easily that we can talk over each other sometimes, but the knowledge base is so much deeper because we're open to that. We're not competitive at all.
Right.
In fact, it'd be like, this is all you. Bring your knowledge to the table because it's so much of it's just a bigger view. Right?
It's a better outcome, right? We talk about being better together. It's a little bit about being better together, right? You have great ideas. I have great ideas. But when we have our ideas and we bring them together, it's just amazing. You just reminded me as you were talking of a story I haven't said in a while. And it was, I was facilitating and I had a new leader, right? So I had a new VP of whatever. And we were facilitating together. And I'm in this is like month 2. And every time there is a question from the audience, there's probably 35 people in the room. It was very small. It was like a 3-day. So it was pretty intense training back in the day when 3-day trainings were kind of a thing. And she would always flip it to me. And so I was like 31. And so I was pretty young in my career. And
I thought you were 32.
Yeah, it was last year. Wow. Way to keep me honest. Okay. Yep. Anyway, last year when I was working with her, so this kept happening, and this was probably 2 or 3 trainings into this. And so we're going to talk about this, I think a little bit later, about like communication. I kept thinking she was doing this to see if I knew the right answer. Swear, I know. I was talking about naive and young and I was like, oh, am I saying, and I was worried I'm not saying the right things. Am I agreeing with her? And then finally, I don't know, we're at dinner after one of these things and I kind of just asked about it. So all these, 3 times of struggling through it, I just asked, she said, oh, you're so much better on your feet than I am. And I was like, oh, okay.
Thanks.
Yeah. So anyway, so just kind of something around, We'll get more into that another time. We talk about a communication tool, but that came into I was like, wow, that was just kind of silly on my part. But when you're together and you're up there, whether you are in front of a group of people or you're working on a project or working on a team or, doing a report, someone can see something different. So getting more people a power of and I think is important.
It is super important. So again, mindset shift.
Yeah.
Oh, we don't have to just pick one.
Right.
Can we step back and look at, would there be 2 options that would work really well together, a hybrid option, right? And that's something I'm still working through, that being an all or nothing girl.
Right.
That is still something that I have to consciously tell myself to step back. Because you'll say it every so often when I'm like, should we do this or should we do that? And you're like, can we do both? Right. And you would think that'd be easy for me because lots of kids, lots of companies, lots of things going on. You would think I don't say no a lot, but there's something different about this.
Yeah.
something different about, and maybe because one of my strengths that's the lowest is deliberative. I don't deliberate anything, so I can pull triggers really quick on one item. But to actually step back, take that pause, and say, would two of these work better if we put them together?
A combination. Yeah.
I don't think that's bad at all.
No, I think it's great. And what I love about The Power of And is there's a book. So it goes a little bit, it's not The Power of And, it's Yes and. And so that is from, I don't know who the authors are, but it's from Second City. Do you know who have we talked about this?
I don't think so.
So Second City is out of Chicago, and it is a comedy improv group. And I can't, my husband would be able to rattle off all the people, but many of the comedians that were on Saturday Night Live came from Second City.
Really?
So we were doing this corporate high level, like VP program, and they were like, they're going to run a country, or they're going to be chief information
run
officer.
Their company in that country.
In that country, right. Wait, what? Okay, yeah.
Run a country.
Right. Oh, did I say? In my head, it was also, but they're going to run the company for that country, right? They're going to run Brazil, or they're going to run China, or things like that. And so we had this really elaborate, it was an amazing program. We were going to take them to Chicago. And so I'm like, oh, Second City's there. And so we knew the book, we gave them the book. And the concept of Yes and is really about, from an improv perspective, is to continue the conversation. It is the complete opposite of being competitive, right? You are trying to continue the conversation, and you're trying to, think about a tennis match. I can lob the ball to you so you can return it back to me.
For play.
Or I can, ace it and slam it and you're out, right? So when I was younger, I went like, how long can we go and play volleyball and go back and forth? And that's the concept of improv. So I never want to stop you. I want to encourage you, which becomes yes and. Like, yes, and can we do that? So when you're brainstorming, you're like, yes, that's great. And you then keep kind of putting your information in there. So that comes from, it is a good book, actually. It comes from Second City. I think it's a couple of authors, and it tells a lot about the idea of improv. It's how do you continue the conversation? And there's some other concepts in there, like when to ask questions, because, I'm a big question answer. Actually, we were in a meeting yesterday, and a team meeting, and she's like, I have 1,000 questions. And that's me. I'm like, someone says something, I'm like, I have 100 questions right now. So it's also talks about when to question, because that can cut things down too, right? So if you question too early in the process.
Okay, now I understand what you're saying.
So they have a lot of other concepts in, though it's called yes and it's this idea of how do you keep ideation going, how do you get brainstorming going, and how do you keep the conversation? And really, for me, the big picture is how do you set up for success for both of us, right? Let's not ace shot and shut it down. Let's continue.
I love that analogy. I'm a volleyball coach, so I just struggle with it just a little bit.
You are. I always forget, years, right?
Yeah, for 20 years. I coached volleyball.
I think my sister wanted to be that.
Oh, really?
Yeah, she did. I've talked about that. I forget.
Yeah, great. So I've been a coach my entire life, right? And this was just in the athletic field. So yes, our game was to terminate the point. Right. But when that's not your goal, right? It's to continue the conversation, to keep it going, to stay curious, the yes and, but to ask questions. We noticed one thing at our retreat. There were some quiet people. There's always quiet people in the room. Right. And sometimes they can be discounted, right? And so really to be intentional, if you're leading meetings, to make sure you're asking the questions to everybody and giving a pause. Because if they do have deliberative, the strength I mentioned, maybe they do have to think through, or high intellection, they're processors. Or what I loved about the meeting we facilitated yesterday is we role played it before, and you said, ask them to write down their questions. That gives space. So you are continuing the conversation because they're going to bring in the questions. So whether they're rapid fire like us,
right,
and they can just click through things super fast, then your people that maybe take a little bit of time, they're like, whoa, I need to process this, because the and will continue.
Right.
Right. It's almost like it's an open-ended meeting.
Yeah.
And just thinking of that visual for people who don't like to be on the spot and give you an answer straight away. I didn't know that was a thing. I literally did not know that was a thing.
Like people needed time? Is that what you mean? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so that's something I had to learn. Yeah. Like, oh, hey, you want to get back to me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll get back to you next week. And I'm like, when?
I have moved on. I mean, if you say that, if I say that to you, by the time next week comes, you're like, we have moved on so far. Yeah.
Right. But learning that there's different styles in the room. And if you want to keep the meeting going, you want the their feedback is valuable. Just because they're quiet and have to think about it, they actually will probably put more thought into their words sometimes than we do, right? When we're high communication, so it just comes out, and sometimes that can be intimidating.
Absolutely.
Right? So a never-ending meeting. Now for achievers, they'd rather just
well, yeah, even corporate, I'm like, okay, not quite that. But the idea of being as a leader, being thoughtful about who's in the room, whether you're a project leader or you're actually like leader of people, and these are your direct reports, is thinking, how can I incorporate and in here and hear from the introverts, those people that need to, or let's say internal processors and external processors, right? How do I keep that? I learned this pretty quickly when I started with a team. I started leading a team. And I was leading a team, and I was in Dallas, and there were some team members that were in Louisville. So we went to Louisville, and we were doing a team retreat, and it was a small team. There were only about 4 or 5 of us. And we had to do my favorite activity, right? Plus minus delta. We'll talk about that again if we haven't. And I know I've told you this story, but this is so typically me. So we go, and we need to like put all our thoughts on to Post-it notes, right? And so I'm like, okay, guys, let's just as you say what it is, write on your Post-it note, and we're going to put it up here on the wall so then we can all see it, and then we can move forward in the process. So they looked at me and they said, well, can we have a few minutes to write down ideas on your Post-it note? I'm like, oh, sure, let's do that. I mean, I'm good in mid-change. I'm like, yeah, take some time. So for 5 minutes, these, they happen to be all women, were writing down madly on Post-it notes. And I had nothing. Like I had 2 and they had like 15. And I was trying so hard. I'm like, what? Anyway, so finally the 5 minutes, the longest 5 minutes maybe of my life, it finally is over. And it's time now to put it up on the wall. And as soon as one person read her Post-it note and put it on the wall, I had 15 downloaded because I'm so extrovert and I'm such a brainstormer that I need that interaction with people. That's when it downloaded. However, going forward, I know both people are in the room. Both types are in the room. And there's a type even that kind of needed to think about it before we got to the meeting. So the power of and or yes and really being able to be it's such an inclusion tool. It's such a concept and a mindset. How can we be more collaborative? How can we be more inclusive? So I learned pretty fast that, hey, I'm this way. But to be successful, I need it to work for everyone in the room.
For sure. So we are all about practicality, right? And takeaway tips. What's one thing we can do this week? And you brought up a very good point, whether you're at work, whether you're at home, knowing the styles of your people. Do they need to know ahead of time, hey, we're going to have a family meeting on Friday, or we have an issue we need to talk about tomorrow, right? Do they need the advance notice? Because the power of and sometimes is about what choices, but also it's the type of people, I think, right? Do they need it ahead of time? Are they good on the fly? Or do they need time on the back end of it to come back? So you have so much more collaboration. So know your audience, know your group, know your family. I'm one that for sure thought my daughter was an introvert till she went to college, and her twin and I were sitting in the room, and she's like, can you just go to his dorm for now? I was like, oh. So we got there and I looked at him. I said, is your sister an introvert? He goes, I think so. Like she's so lively, right? So somebody I knew intimately, right? Like I'm her mother, right? I misjudged if she was an introvert or extrovert. Right. So don't automatically assume that you know who's in the room. Pick up on those learning styles and know that if you want to include everybody, right, that you need to know how they best will show up.
Absolutely.
And then another tip you talked about, having that question ready, where you could set the stage, right? When you're talking about a concept, you can ask everybody how they can feedback to you.
Right.
Right. Such good tips. What other tips do you think that our listeners, our viewers could do this week that's simple? Because we talked about small changes last week.
We did.
What small change can you put out there for us to be more so we can adopt and?
I think, well, I always start with mindset. So it is a mindset. So taking a hot minute to really think about, hey, is this natural for me? Am I a thinker of the power of and? Do I think, yes, we can do and A and B, right? We can do both. Or that, yes, let's continue the conversation. Or again, there's not one way to reach the audience. Let's do multiple ways. Find out, just spend some time with yourself. Is that me or if it's not me? And then the simple thing, and I've said this before, is just a reminder on your phone, on a sticky, on your computer that says the power of and. And then just kind of go into a meeting where maybe you're problem solving with that. And when you hear right, so no, also comes my harmony is pretty low, right? When you see some conflict going or decision making, I'm good with it. I'm like, I will work it out. I believe in it. That doesn't bother me. Is your ability to say, hey, can we do both in some way? Is that going to be helpful to us? Is that going to help us? What's the power of and here?
Mm-hmm. And I think it's also that pause, right? We as high communication people want to fill that space, but it's sometimes that pause where you make it a safe space for other people to know that they can share with you.
Absolutely.
So that they believe that you're willing to make a change.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. So thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.